Hey vinyl community, Mark here again from Sound Matters, covering all things vinyl, and in today's video we are talking about locked grooves, which is very closely related to the previous video we did on run out groove messages, or dead wax messages if you like, hidden messages in that dead space between the record, the end of the record side, and the label. Now this is a very closely related topic. It's those infinite loops at the end of a side of a record. So there's plenty of things to explore here, or examples to explore. Let's get straight into it. So standard records, of course, have that signature, very familiar locked groove at the end of each side, which sounds a little bit like this. So this almost silent standard locked groove is of course essential for stopping the stylus from drifting into the label, and it's a pretty benign thing. We hear it on every single record, but it is possible to do something a little bit different. It's possible to apply some sound into this space and apply an extra layer of creativity to the record as an art form, and I think this is what this is really all about. Similarly to what we talked about with hidden messages in the dead wax space, it's possible to extend that kind of physical medium art form in the form of these locked audio grooves that just go on and on and on at the end of the record. It's amazing what you can do with a physical format. There's just so much more to vinyl than the music and the sound of vinyl and the kind of characteristics of the format. It's the complete art form. I think that's what makes this so interesting. Now next I'm going to list out some really famous examples of locked grooves on records, and then I want to hear from you down in the comments below about locked grooves in your collection too. So I've headed over to the Sound Matters website for these examples, because what I've done here is actually included some YouTube clips in a previous written topic version of this that we've covered before. These YouTube clips are handy for you because you can actually go and listen to these locked grooves for yourself, of course, as well. Now one of the most famous examples is Sgt. Pepper, the Beatles. So the last track, after the last track finishes on this record, the dead wax reveals a kind of creepy layered voices mix, if you like, and this is essentially a result of the band were really inspired by kind of tape manipulation and studio trickery, of course, at the time, the pioneering sort of side of that, and a lot of that was kind of inspired by Musique Concrète, which is often touted as being the very beginnings, the very foundation of electronic music and sampling. Of course, it's some French composers wanted to create music that was completely avant-garde and different, and they used tape machines after World War II to kind of manipulate sounds and create different things that didn't resemble normal music and normal sounds and normal instruments. In fact, we've actually covered that entire style before over at the website as well. If you'd like to read about it, you can check out the link in the description below as well. Now, even if you could decipher what was being said in this loop of weird, creepy, layered up, textured kind of voices and everything that's at the end of Sgt. Pepper's, it wouldn't matter anyway, because there's actually 3 different versions depending on which release you have of the record. So if you head over to the website here, the YouTube clip that I've put in here actually includes the 3 different editions of this locked groove, this creepy kind of avant-garde, LSD fused kind of sounding locked groove, if you like. Next up is an example from Pink Floyd, Atom Heart Mother, which, if you're familiar with the album, you'll know the bizarre track at the end, the last track, Alan's Psychedelic Breakfast, which is essentially a bizarre part soundscape, part kind of dialogue thing that includes one of the band's roadies at the time, Alan Stiles, essentially discussing and preparing breakfast. Now, if that wasn't mad enough by itself, Roger Waters actually started with this track essentially experimenting with the rhythm of a dripping tap. So the track starts with the sound of a dripping tap and then ends with the sound of the dripping tap, and that sound goes on infinitely if left untouched in the form of an interesting locked groove, which you can hear over the website using this video here. Now, we couldn't touch on this subject, of course, without discussing Jack White's Lazaretto, or the Ultra LP as it was described at the time. Now, there are 2 locked grooves on this record, but what makes it interesting and different is that side A has a locked groove that is on the outside edge of the record, because, of course, side A of this record plays back to front from the label to the outer edge. There's an audible locked groove at the end of that side. And, of course, on side B, there is a more conventional locked groove at the end in the dead wax between the end of the record and the label. Go check it out for yourself at the website by listening to Jack White's Ultra LP demonstration video that they made at the time of the release of the record. Another example is the Mars Volta Francis the Mute, and this has become somewhat of a holy grail find for a lot of fans. Being released in 2005, the vinyl revival hadn't really taken off at this point, and so it's a bit of a limited edition run that was done at the time that, as far as I know, hasn't been reissued. Now, one of the albums of theirs that has been reissued recently is De-Loused and the Comatorium, which VMP released recently a few months back. Nice version of that record. If you are a fan, I recommend you check it out in the link in the description below. But in terms of Francis the Mute, hopefully this does get a reissue at some point. It really goes to town on the concept of locked grooves. There's one on all 3 records, so there's lots to explore here. Really cleverly on this record is one of the locked grooves essentially connects one side of a record to the next. So when you get to side 2, the beginning of that side essentially starts with the same loop that is in the locked groove on the end of side 1, making this kind of continuous effect that really plays into the kind of progressive rock nature of the Mars Volta that they're really well known for. You can hear it for yourself, of course, over at the website. Pick up a modern copy of Rush Fly By Night and you'll be familiar with how the chimes at the end of By Tor and the Snow Dog kind of fade out over time. Pick up a 1970s copy of this album and you'll be treated to never-ending chimes that go on in the form of a locked groove into, if you like, prog rock abyss. The last example before I hand this over to you guys is the Moody Blues on the Threshold of a Dream, which I really like because it's one of those albums that kind of starts and ends with the same reference points, almost like a well-written paragraph. Another example is Selling England by the Pound by Genesis, where the album starts and ends with the same kind of guitar motif, kind of connecting the beginning and the end of the album and making it almost a complete, well-finished story. The complete picture, if you like. Now, on this album, if you get a modern version of it on a CD, the kind of synth sound that plays at the end that is referencing the beginning of the album essentially just kind of fades out over time. But on the album version, on the original album version, there's a locked groove where that kind of synth sound goes on infinitely at the end of the record. Really nice touch, just referencing the beginning of the album at the end, but doing so with a locked groove. So I could go on forever. There are so many examples, but really now I want to hand it over to you guys. Let us know down in the comments below which locked grooves you really like or have noticed in your record collection. And if you're new to this channel, please do consider subscribing and we'll see you in that next video. Keep spinning.